Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining Success Works Partners this afternoon for a really exciting launch of their new product, Redefining Recruitment, a practical guide into hiring women with criminal records. We are recording the session today, and before we get started, I would just like to give an acknowledgement. Success Works would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands where we work. We would really like to acknowledge the disproportionate number of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the criminal justice system today, and that impact on women, children, and communities. We pay our respects to elders past and present. So before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions, please pop them in the chat. We will be having a Q&A at the end. We would ask that you keep your cameras off, and also please remember to mute yourselves to avoid any background noise. To get us started, I would love to hand over to Yvette, who is Success Works Partners CEO. Over to you, Yvette.
Thanks, Gemma. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name's Yvette Evans-Streeter and I'm the CEO of Success Works Partners. So the Redefining Recruitment Guide has been developed by Success Works and written by Gemma Wisdom to help employers better understand, assess and respond to criminal records in recruitment processes while creating fairer pathways to employment for women with lived experience of the criminal legal system. Gemma is the Training and Capacity Building Manager at the Intellectual Disability Rights Services and is a member of the Success Works Board. She has over 7 years of experience working in the UK prison system, including employment at Working Chance, the UK's only employment charity solely for women with a criminal record. Today is an important milestone for our organisation and for everyone who believes that employment can be a powerful force for social and economic change. At Success Works, we work alongside women with a criminal record and are rebuilding their lives through employment. Every day, we meet women with extraordinary resilience, skills, talent, and determination. Yet, despite their capabilities, many face significant barriers when looking for work. The stigma attached to a criminal record can often prevent employers from seeing the person behind the conviction and the potential they bring to the workplace. We know that meaningful employment is one of the most effective ways to reduce reoffending, strengthen families, and improve long-term outcomes for women and their communities. We also know that many employers genuinely want to be inclusive, but are often unsure how to approach criminal records, what information is relevant, how to interpret police checks, or how to balance risk with fairness. That uncertainty is exactly why we created Redefining Recruitment. Thanks to our generous supporter, Parramatta Leagues Club, we received the necessary funding to produce the guide. Redefining Recruitment is designed to move the conversation beyond compliance and process and into something much more important: humanity, opportunity, and informed decision-making. It provides employers with practical tools, case studies, risk assessment frameworks, guidance on reading police checks, and strategies for creating more inclusive recruitment practices. Most importantly, it aims to build confidence. Confidence to have conversations, confidence to assess suitability fairly, and confidence to make recruitment decisions based on potential rather than assumptions. At the heart of the guide are 3 simple principles: recognise, understand, implement. Recognise the barriers women face, understand how to assess criminal records fairly and in context, and implement recruitment practices that create genuine opportunities for talented candidates who might otherwise be overlooked. Throughout the guide, we challenge employers to ask themselves some important questions. Am I judging someone's past and limiting their future? Have I considered whether a criminal record is genuinely relevant to the role? Have I given this person the opportunity to explain their circumstances and demonstrate who they are today? Because ultimately, this guide is not about lowering standards. It is about making better hiring decisions. It is about balancing risk with fairness, replacing assumptions with evidence, and recognising that a criminal record should not automatically define a person's future. As we say throughout the guide, employers who embrace this approach don't just fill vacancies, they change lives. Today marks the start of what we hope will be a broader conversation about how organisations can strengthen diversity, inclusion, and social impact through the way they recruit and support people. And with this in mind, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to our keynote speaker, Trina Sunday. Trina is a humans first leadership strategist, founder and CEO of Reimagine HR, and the creator of Heart at Work, a philosophy that encourages organisations to build workplaces where humanity and performance belongs together. With more than 25 years of experience spanning human resources, organisational development, marketing and events across the UK, Asia and Australia, Trina has built a reputation for helping organisations challenge outdated systems and reimagine the way work is designed. Through Reimagine HR, she works with organisations and HR leaders willing to ask difficult questions, challenge traditional thinking, and create workplaces that deliver better outcomes for people and for business. Her work brings together commercial thinking, authentic human connection, and the courage to lead meaningful change. What makes Trina's contribution today particularly relevant is her deep commitment to fairness, equity, and creating opportunities for people who are often overlooked or excluded by traditional employment systems. Those values strongly align with the purpose of redefining recruitment and with the work we do every day at SuccessWorks. An AHRI Fellow, Board Director, Facilitator, Speaker, and the host of the Heart at Work podcast, Trina is known for challenging accepted ways of doing things and reminding leaders there is no profit without a pulse. I can think of no one better to help us launch this guide and start this important conversation. I'll post Trina's contact information in the chat for anyone who may want to connect with her after the webinar. Please join me in welcoming Trina Sunday. Over to you, Trina.
Wow, what an incredible introduction. Thank you so much, Yvette. And hello from Wajak Budja. I'm super excited to be talking about equity in action today and who actually gets to thrive at work. And I want to start with something I've become increasingly convinced of after more than 25 years working with people and organisations. I don't think we have an inclusion awareness problem anymore. I think we have an equity in action problem. Most organisations I work with, they believe in inclusion. Most leaders I coach believe that people should be treated fairly. And most HR professionals I work alongside genuinely want to create workplaces where people can thrive. And we've become pretty good at the language: diversity, inclusion, belonging, psychological safety, flexibility, accessibility, neuro-inclusion, gender equity, and that's progress. But knowing the language of inclusion doesn't necessarily mean that we've changed the experience of exclusion. And that's the gap that I'm interested in, the gap between our intentions and our impact. Because the workplaces we say we want to create and what people actually experience when they try to enter them, navigate them, and succeed within them, they're different. Because inclusion's relatively easy when the person in front of us fits comfortably inside the systems that we've designed, right? The real test comes when they don't, when their life is messy, when their career isn't linear, when their brain works differently, when they need flexibility that isn't particularly convenient, when they communicate differently, disability requires us to change something, or when their history makes us uncomfortable. So when something in the past becomes louder than everything they might contribute in their future, and that's particularly relevant to the conversation we're having today about redefining recruitment and the incredible work that Success Works Partners is doing with women who have navigated the criminal justice system, because their circumstances may be different. And some of the barriers may be more visible, but the underlying equity question is remarkably familiar. Are we assessing the person and their potential, or are we allowing one characteristic, one circumstance, or one chapter of their life to define them? Because workplaces do that, I'm here to tell you, in all sorts of ways. And that's when inclusion stops being something we say we value and equity becomes something we have to do. Like, I spend a lot of my working life inside organisations. As a consultant, I get invited in to look at structures and systems and culture and people practices. As a coach, I hear what leaders are wrestling with when they don't necessarily have all the answers. And as a trainer and facilitator, I can tell you that I work with people who are trying to turn ideas like inclusion, fairness, and good leadership into everyday decisions. And somewhere along the way, I've also become a bit of an equity crusader, and I've become known for it because I keep seeing the same contradiction. Good people with good intentions working inside systems that still produce unfair outcomes. And I think that's really important for us to look at, because systemic discrimination doesn't require a room full of discriminatory people. It doesn't normally arrive with somebody announcing, right, who are we going to exclude today? That's not how it works. It's more subtle than that. It lives in the things that we've stopped questioning, the qualifications we've always required, the hours we've expected someone to work, the gap in a CV that apparently needs explaining, the definition of professional, or what doesn't feel like the right culture fit. It's the way we define leadership potential, the recruitment process that's been the recruitment process for as long as anybody can remember. And the background check. The background check that gets done because we've always done the background check. And individually, these things can look completely reasonable, right? But if you zoom out and look at who repeatedly gets through and who repeatedly doesn't, and sometimes it's a very different picture that emerges. And that's why the biggest barriers to equity aren't always labelled discrimination. Sometimes they're labelled policy, process, precedent, professionalism, merit, fit, risk, until we stop and ask what they're actually doing. We've spent a lot of time talking about diversity, inclusion, belonging, and they matter enormously, but I think it's useful to understand the different questions they are asking of us. Diversity asks who's in the room. Inclusion asks whose contribution is heard and valued. Belonging asks us if people genuinely feel like they can be themselves in that room. And equity asks whether everyone had a fair opportunity to get into the room and thrive once they're there. And then there's justice. Justice asks us to examine, why were some people kept out of the room in the first place? And that's a much more uncomfortable question, because now we're no longer talking about how helping individuals overcome barriers. We're examining the barriers themselves. Who designed them, who they work well for, who has to work harder to navigate them, and who might never get through them at all. And there is a particular irony in the word justice for the conversation that we are having today, because some people experience the criminal justice system, serve the sentence or consequence society's determined, and then discover that release doesn't necessarily mean that the punishment is over. They can encounter another kind of sentence, not one handed down by the court, but one created through stigma, assumptions, closed doors, and opportunities that disappear because of something in their past. And that is where justice and equity collide. Because surely rehabilitation has to include the possibility of participation, of contribution, of independence, of work. And it raises the difficult question, like, when does accountability end and systemic exclusion begin? But of course, even talking about women with a criminal record risks putting people again in another neat little box. And humans don't work like that. People don't arrive at work one characteristic at a time. A woman isn't only a woman. She might be a woman of colour, a single parent, neurodivergent, a little neurospicy. She might have experienced family violence, poverty, homelessness, trauma, disrupted education. She may have spent time in the criminal justice system, and she may be carrying several of these experiences all at once. Every layer can change how she encounters the next system. And that's something workplace systems aren't always very good at understanding, because we like categories, we like policies, we like boxes. Boxes are easier to manage, but humans don't live in boxes. And that disadvantage, it can compound. A woman rebuilding her life after prison isn't necessarily encountering one employment barrier called criminal record. She may also be navigating the assumptions about her gender, her race, the suburb she lives in, the way she speaks, the gap in her CV, her financial circumstances, her caring responsibilities, the way her brain works, perhaps her confidence of years of being told, explicitly or otherwise, where she does or doesn't belong. And if we look at all of those things separately, we can convince ourselves that none is particularly significant. But people experience the cumulative weight of all of them. One barrier might be okay to navigate, but 5 barriers stacked on top of one another can make opportunity incredibly difficult to reach. And then here's the part I think we really need to challenge. Sometimes we look at the person who hasn't successfully navigated all of that, and we conclude that they are the problem, that they're not confident enough, that they're not polished enough, that they don't interview well, their CV's not strong enough, or they don't have the right experience, that they're too risky. And that's the moment that I think we need to become really curious about whether we are assessing someone's capability or assessing how successfully they've managed to navigate the systems that were never designed with their life in mind. Which brings me to one of my least favourite phrases in workplace life, but we treat everybody the same. It's almost always said with good intentions, and I understand why. For decades, we've been taught that consistency equals fairness. Same rules, same process, same expectations, same opportunity. Except there's a problem. Sameness isn't fairness. If I gave all of you on this call a size 7 pair of shoes, I could proudly tell you that I'd treated all of you equally. And some of you would be delighted, but some would squeeze your feet into them and spend the day incredibly uncomfortable, and some would find them completely useless. The shoes are the same, but the experience isn't, and workplaces do exactly the same thing. Equality asks, did everybody go through the same process? But equity asks, did everybody have a genuinely fair opportunity within it? And that context matters, because 2 people can arrive at exactly the same recruitment process with completely different journeys behind them. A gap in the employment might look like a gap on a CV. Behind it could sit caring responsibilities, illness, family violence, homelessness, incarceration, recovery, starting again. The application looks the same, but the journey wasn't. And equity is asking all of us in organisations to be intelligent enough to understand the difference. And that's harder than treating everybody the same, because it requires context and curiosity and judgment, sometimes flexibility, and occasionally courage. Sameness feels and is safe. Equity can be messy, but people are messy, life is messy. And if our definition of fairness only works when everybody arrives with broadly the same circumstances, perhaps we are not being as fair as we thought we were. And that's another contradiction that I see constantly, because we tend to get pretty enthusiastic about inclusion right up to the point where it becomes inconvenient. We support flexibility until it doesn't fit neatly around our preferred ways of working. We celebrate neurodiversity until it becomes a bit harder for us to navigate. We want diverse leadership until the candidate looks, sounds, or behaves differently. Equity isn't tested when it's easy. It's tested when doing the equitable thing requires something from us, a different decision, a different conversation, a little more curiosity, and sometimes perhaps discomfort and courage. And that's what I mean by equity in action. It's not another strategy or another policy or another statement on the website. It is in the thousands of small decisions made every day. And organisations aren't the only system at play here. Society is, because we don't leave our assumptions at the office door. We carry ideas with us about what success looks like, what professionalism looks like, what a leader sounds like, what a good career looks like, who feels trustworthy, who feels risky, who has potential, and who deserves another opportunity. Even what makes somebody worthy of work. And those assumptions inevitably find their way into organisational decisions, sometimes without us even noticing. Which is why equity work can't simply be about fixing policies and processes. We have to become curious about the assumptions underneath them. So here's one thing I want to challenge. We often talk about equity as though it sits on one side of the organisational ledger and performance sits on the other. Equity is the nice thing to do. Performance is the commercial thing to do. I've never bought into that. My work is grounded in a pretty simple belief. People and performance should thrive side by side. Equity doesn't mean lowering the bar. It means getting much smarter about what that bar is actually measuring. So if an organisation learns to recognise capability that another organisation overlooks, that's not charity. That's talent strategy. If you create an environment where a broader range of people can contribute at their best, that is not lowering standards. That's good business. And if you remove an unnecessary barrier that's prevented capable people from getting through the door, then you haven't compromised merit. You've probably understood merit better than anybody else. And that's why I'm uncomfortable with the language about giving people a chance, particularly when we're talking about people whose histories might make employers uncomfortable. Because if we listen to what the language implies, we'll take a chance on you. It positions the organisation as brave and generous and the individual as a risk to be tolerated. But what if she is actually the talent we failed to recognise? What if the resilience, resourcefulness, determination, and perspective developed through a complicated life have value? What if instead of asking what happened to this person, we became equally interested in what is this person capable of now? Equity isn't charity. It's recognising capability without pretending that history doesn't exist. It's about applying context rather than assumptions and creating a genuine access to opportunity. Because for years, we've invested enormous energy in fixing the person, become more employable, become more confident, more resilient, improve your CV, explain the gap, learn how to interview, build your presence, manage your neurodivergence, work around your responsibilities, explain your history, prove you're ready. Jump through enough hoops and we will eventually let you in. And yes, developing people's capability can be enormously valuable. I'm a coach and a trainer. I deeply believe in development. But equity asks us to turn the lens around occasionally. What if the person isn't the only thing that needs to change? What if the recruitment process needs to change? The job design, the manager's assumptions, the definition of professionalism, an organisation's appetite for difference, the system itself. Because resilience shouldn't mean becoming exceptionally good at surviving barriers that we have the power to remove. So when I talk about equity in action, I'm not suggesting another initiative. I'm talking about a habit, a leadership habit, an organizational habit, and absolutely an HR habit. The habit of getting curious about the things we have stopped questioning. Why is this policy here? Why do we require this? What are we actually measuring? Whose circumstances did we imagine when we designed this job? Who does this process really work well for? And who has to work harder to navigate it? Because it's really important to look at what assumptions sit underneath our definition of professionalism. And perhaps the question every organisation should be asking is actually, who could thrive here, but will never get the opportunity because of something in the system we've designed? Not because they lack talent, not because they can't do the work, but because they don't fit the assumptions sitting around it. So perhaps that's the challenge I want to leave you with today. Let's move beyond diversity as something we count, beyond inclusion as something we endorse, and beyond belonging as something we hope people feel, and beyond equity as something we say matters, toward equity in action. Equity you can see in who gets through the door, in whose voice gets heard, in whose circumstances are understood, in who gets flexibility, in who gets developed, who gets the opportunity and promoted, in whether someone's past is considered context rather than allowed to determine their future, and ultimately in who gets to thrive at work. Because good intentions matter, but they don't change systems on their own. And perhaps one of the greatest tests of an equitable workplace isn't how well our systems work for the people they were designed around. It's what happens when someone arrives who they weren't designed around. Justice asks us to understand why the barriers exist. And equity, it asks us to do something about them. And I believe the future of work becomes more human when we are brave enough to do both. And I invite you to join me. Thank you.
Wow, Trina, thank you so much for that. I think that's probably given everyone in the room something to think about. I think you've really understood the purpose of this project and what Success Works Partners is trying to challenge with this work. I think accountability ending and then becoming systemic discrimination is something that we really are seeing at the moment. So thank you so much for kind of bringing those thoughts to the table. I'm now delighted to set on with the panel that we're going to do this afternoon. So again, I invite you to pop your questions in the chat box for us to take a look at the end of the panel. As Yvette mentioned, I am Gemma Wisdom. I was the author of Redefining Recruitment, and I've been lucky enough to spend the last 9 months interviewing women from the Success Works programme and also employers who have really benefited from hiring from the Success Works talent pool. But ultimately, those 9 months have been spent trying to challenge and break down systemic discrimination that women with criminal records are facing when they're trying to re-enter the workforce. I'm also a very proud member of the Success Works board. I'm joined today by Natasha, who is the Employment and Training Programme Coordinator at Success Works Partners. Natasha has lived experience of the criminal legal system and uses this experience to advocate for women finding employment and rebuilding their life post a criminal record. Natasha will also actually be the one bringing Redefining Recruitment to your workplaces. So hopefully this will be the first of many conversations you have with Natasha. And I'm also delighted to be joined by Tove, who is another one of our Success Works board members. Tove has lived experience of the criminal legal system and also brings that first-hand experience of finding work following incarceration. Tove really brings this experience to the forefront of the board, trying to influence inclusive governance and ensure lived experience remains at the heart of our operational processes. And then, of course, we also have Trina Sunday joining the panel this afternoon. Welcome, everyone. Thanks again, Trina, for that really important setup of the panel this afternoon. I'm going to start with an opening question for the panel. Trina's just challenged us there to think about the systems that we've designed. From your perspective, where do you think the biggest barrier to employment actually sits today? Is it in the recruitment process? Is it in organisational risk appetite or risk assessment? Or is it down to people's attitudes? Natasha, I might start with you if you're okay with that.
Absolutely. Look, I think it's all three, and they all can also play out together, and then it becomes even more challenging. But the recruitment process itself can create barriers through those tick box questions and pre-selection screening around your offences, so you don't even get seen. And if risk isn't assessed realistically and on a case-by-case basis, it automatically creates exclusion. And then personal bias, it plays a significant role when it's not recognised or challenged.
Yeah, absolutely. Tove, what do you kind of think in terms of where that real barrier is sitting from your experience as well, from re-entering the workforce, from coming back to work? Where do you kind of sit with that?
So I guess I think that it's similarly to what Natasha and Trina has already touched on. I think that it's all three, right? But it does definitely depend organization to organization. So I've always been very open about my background, and I haven't actually applied for any jobs that have that tick box when they're requesting a criminal police check. And the first employment that I got, I did a phone interview and I told the employer straight away, just so you know, I do have a criminal record. And I'm going to say lucky, not lucky, but she was like, oh my God, I'm going through that process myself. I've just been charged. so we kind of bonded over that. But I would say that is not the most common experience that people have. I definitely think that policy is a major preventing or just discouraging little tick box that you see when you're coming out trying to apply for employment. Even if you know that you'll be perfect for the job, if you see that you need to provide a criminal record check, and not everyone has just a one line on there. People may have 10 pages of charges, right, spanning over years. So that is not something that everyone wants to bring up and talk about, because it is so much to it and there's trauma attached to that too. So you just need to see that that's a criteria, and you get scared and you don't even want to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's interesting, isn't it, when you say the kind of trauma of what's on a record. I can't imagine anyone feeling empowered to go and do an interview once they've just had to face such a intense amount of work in their past. Trina, what do you think? I'm just interested to think from your perspective.
I think just to add, I think what I think is the most dangerous barrier is probably the fact that the barriers look so legitimate. Like I think what is most dangerous about this is that they look legitimate. It's like discrimination by design. And I think that the question that when I'm coaching organisations would be, could I explain this policy to the face of someone with lived experience and explain to them why this barrier was necessary or fair? And I think if you can't do that, then the barrier that you've got in place probably is not necessary or needs to be examined.
Yeah,
Agreed.
Thank you. It's a very different thing having something on a piece of paper and then having that conversation to someone and kind of face to face. So I think that's a great point for us to kind of think about. In terms of that, then, there are two sides of the recruitment table represented here. So I'm interested to know, Natasha and Tove, what do you want the HR side to understand and know? And then Trina, what do you want to know from people with lived experience, and what does the other side not really know about one another?
Do you want to go first, Tove, or?
Yeah, sure. I'll keep it relatively brief, but I guess it's just that everyone, irrespectively if you have a criminal record or not, is bigger than their worst mistake that they've ever done. And then obviously women with a criminal record, we will all vary in experience and skills, and there'll be women who's coming into the workplace maybe for the first time ever, right? And then there's a lot of, I guess, insecurities, and even knowing how to present yourself to an employer. But then you have the people with maybe 20 years experience in a very particular field, and it may be a government field, right? So the barriers, them asking for a criminal record is just essentially automatically going to exclude her, but she may be perfect for the job, and it may just have been a silly mistake or something that came out of domestic violence or drinking or whatever it may have been, right? But here we are 3 years later or 2 years later, and that's not who she is anymore. She's rebuilt, and she's in a whole different system and on a different path. So yeah, I guess it's just assessing people where they're at then and there.
So that call to action of, understand where something has come from rather than just seeing it on a piece of paper. How about you, Natasha? What do you want the kind of HR leaders and recruiters of today? What do you want Trina to kind of take forward today?
So I'd like everyone, even if you're not a hiring manager, just everybody to stop and consider how it would feel to be judged by your worst moment over and over again without any context. So just this piece of paper and there's no other context, and you don't get a chance to show what you've done since then. And if I can speak from my own experience, my criminal record is the result of a choice I made, and I paid for this with my freedom. It doesn't tell you anything about the work I've done to change and grow and make better choices. And I believe that adversity either propels you forward or it holds you back. I chose to grow, and that growth is what matters. And that is what we should be judging people by. And we should be giving them that space and that opportunity to showcase everything that they've done since. And even if that's only one or two things, because that's the growth and that's who they are today. And like Tove said, we are also much more than the worst mistake we have ever made.
Absolutely. So Trina, over to you.
So as someone that is an equity crusader and sitting on the side of wanting to speak to the HR people also, as well as kind of to share what happens on the other side. But I think there's a couple of things that come to mind that I would frame not to be defensive, but to give some context, I think, around what happens on the other side of the table. I think there is a few things that come up for me in this conversation, and I use my own Anglo, cisgendered, able-bodied woman who I see has incredible educated. So I come here steeped in privilege, right? So I just want to acknowledge that that for a couple of reasons, because I feel like I'm representative of lots of people that you see working in HR teams. And so one of the things that I think is that we do not have enough lived experience or human storytelling that makes the challenge of the ordinary process relatable, or that the human attached to. I talk a lot on my podcast and anywhere that anyone will listen around a policy is only as good as the impact it has on the next person that interacts with it. And I think there's not enough lived experience. So it's a double-edged sword, right? We need to change the processes to get more lived experience, but the lack of lived experience is thwarting us from changing the processes. The other thing that's coming up for me, so I counsel HR teams, just to address that, around you need to have a diverse circle of people around you, regardless of what your organisation brings to the table. Your job as a people practitioner is to surround yourself with people who are representative of society, right? But the other thing that comes up for me is that lots of these policies and processes are really steeped in fear of accountability. And what I mean by that is, because it's not always, but it would feel this way, I would imagine, it's not always I don't trust her or him, but her. Sometimes the fear is coming from a place of the culture of the organization, where the HR person, for example, will I be blamed for saying yes? So I would challenge leaders to imagine that woman sitting opposite them too. Like, if you're prepared to defend the decision in a boardroom, explain it to the human who has the opportunity to remove the barrier. Like, we've got to back in our people for them to take a risk. And so I think that, that is something that's really important. And the other thing that comes up for me is that there's always three sides to this, right? We've got the candidate trying to come into the organisation or trying to navigate and thrive in that organisation. We've got the hiring manager, who may be 100% on board because they have your context, they've interviewed you, they've talked to you. And then we have the HR process. And then we'll have exec teams that are risk adverse because they don't want bad press, they don't want reputational damage, they don't want to be front page news. And so we shut everything down and we are risk adverse.
Mm-hmm.
So your willingness to include people with lived experience with the criminal justice system is only as good as the most risk adverse person in that model. And so it's quite complex, right? And so organisations need to look at how we line all of those things together, because if it's not consistent and singing from the same hymn sheet, then we're not going to be able to make the change we need.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's so important when you talk about an organisational shift. It's one thing having people willing to interview, willing to bring people on board with criminal records. And then it changes when you've got someone really risk adverse sitting on that interview panel. So asking that question of kind of how can that shift to really open the doors. I'm interested to know from all three of you, if someone has served their sentence, rebuilt their life, and is ready to work, but is continuously being pushed back by recruitment processes, at what point do you think organisations need to stop asking whether they're ready for women with lived experience to come in, or are they actually not ready for them at all? At what point do you think that kind of, you've got Natasha and Tove, for example, you've re-entered the workforce, you've done what we're really encouraging employers to do. At what point do you think workplaces need to assess whether they are ready to make this change? I'll throw over to all three of you.
Natasha, do you want to begin on this one, or do you want me to take it?
Sure. I actually have a short story that kind of speaks to this one, but also speaks to what Trina was just talking about. And it's about a candidate that I worked with, and she went for a job. She was upfront and honest about her past. She had a really strong turnaround story. That's the disclosure piece that we use that term as well in the guide. And she spoke about where she'd been, what had changed, and most importantly, who she is today. The interview went really well. They were impressed by her skills and her abilities and what she could bring to the organisation, and they made her a job offer. She rang me, she was excited, and she was really looking forward to starting work. And then the next day, she received a phone call and the hiring manager apologised, say they're going to withdraw the job offer, that HR had determined there was a risk and they weren't willing to take that risk. This was devastating for her. She'd gone through all of that. She put herself through all that work and was brave enough to be honest and was ready for the opportunity. She brought everything to the table, was told you're good enough, only then to have it pulled out from underneath her because of something that she had already served her time for. So this is kind of what Trina was talking about before. If not everybody is on board, then we're allowing these people to be set up for failure, and it can be really disheartening. So it needs to be, if you're the one that wants to make the changes in the organisation, you need to go and get everyone on board. It has to happen at each level. Otherwise, working with us doesn't work. And what that does to people's confidence, to all the barriers that they're already facing, it can throw them back into years back and into a world of pain. And I know that we shouldn't feel like that's our responsibility, but we do have a responsibility. If we're telling people do the right thing, you'll get ahead, but then we're not opening the doors for them, then yeah, it's just not.
Yeah, I completely agree. I actually have a very similar situation. I went through almost that exact thing, that I got all the way to having a job offer, and then the day after they called me and they took it back, and it literally crumbled me. And being in the situation where I'm in now, in a very conservative job industry. I've looked at other jobs in the same industry, but they want police checks and they want credit checks and they want all of these barriers, or like things that are a barrier. It's almost like you become a little bit of a prisoner. And don't get me wrong, I love my job. I love it. I love it so much. I'm never planning on leaving. I'll be there until I retire, right? But no, honestly, I will. But even if something happened, God forbid that it would, and I would have to look for a new job, I would be so scared because I don't know of any other companies in my industry that would be even willing to look at me.
Yeah. And that's another thing to consider, isn't it, with this work? It's not fair that someone should be pinned down to one role because of the fear that no one else is going to open up to hiring.
And this is under, so I'm going to toot my own horn here, but this is with the backdrop, right, of being the highest performer in the company in history. I carry my team, and had they not given me a chance, right, the project that I'm working on wouldn't have been doing as well as what it's doing. So it's like they engaged me even with a criminal record, and everything has gone really well, and I love them and I want to be there forever, right? But had they been like any of these other companies that wouldn't even have taken a look at me, they may have, don't get me wrong, they may have, but when you see all of those tick boxes, it is just as overwhelming, it's scary, and it's just, I wouldn't want to put myself through that situation again, given the other situation I was in when they took back the offer.
Yeah.
I'm trying to control my rage, my internal rage.
I understand, Trina. I experience it on a daily.
And I think, but I want to be really constructive here always. But I think that, put the emotion to good use, right? There's a few things that come up with this. The question, and I guess to come back to that and then stray a little, if I'm allowed, Gemma, but when is the time for organizations to realize, the readiness question? It's now. It was yesterday. It was a long time ago, actually. But I think the thing that's really important here is there is an organizational imperative to do this. There's a societal, we're talking about reuniting families. We're talking about participation in employment. We're talking about economic benefits to the community. We are talking about, complete participation and rehabilitation and contribution, which helps society, families, the fabric of what makes communities great, right? So there's all of that, but I talk a lot in my work around the ecosystems that overlap, like what's happening in society and what's happening in our workplaces, and then what's happening with that human experience. They are all interconnected. Everything is interconnected. And when you have a war for talent, I hate that term, so I had to do the rabbit ears if anyone's just listening to audio. However, there's an organizational imperative here where we cannot find the talent we need to do work. So why would we not tap into a talent source that is more likely to have more grit, resilience and resourcefulness than half the people that are coming out of certain academic institutions, and a different maturity to apply problem solving, reflection, reflective practice. There are so many capabilities that come with having a complicated life. And I see this a lot with migrant workers also, who have navigated very difficult immigration systems. We need to use that. So like we have to be able to tap into that. And I think the other thing I would talk about or mention, because I think that it's important not to be lost and disempower people who are trying to navigate this, thinking that we just have to wait for the mercy of organizations to change their ways. We can't. So I'm all about trying to look at how we empower people. I talk to my coaching clients a lot about having a personal board. And people go, what are you talking about? Organizations have boards, but it's like you need people in your network and in your life that fill certain roles. So you might have someone on your personal board that looks after your wellness. You might have someone on your personal board that calls BS on your behavior sometimes. A lot of the time that's a best friend that you've got a lot of dirt on each other and they're very honest with you. But you also, in an organizational context, need a sponsor. So we have mentors who are the people that can teach us some things. But I think it's the practicality, and I'll share some materials about this with the team to pass on to anyone on the call. But it's who is your sponsor and how do we help you find them? Sponsors are the people that talk about you in the rooms that you're not in. The sponsor is the person who would replace a typical and traditional referee report, because referees can counter a police check if contextualized in the right way as well. But who are the people that are vouching for you and can help position you? Because hearing you talk about being constrained or limited to stay in a workplace, I hate and get fired up by people not having freedom. Now, you lost freedom if you've had lived experience before. You shouldn't be losing it for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And the freedom to choose is the difference between people surviving and thriving. And so our moral responsibility, our societal responsibility, our organizational responsibility is to help navigate that so people have freedom to choose, because that is when people will do their best work. That is when people go above and beyond, and that is when people are going to make the difference and help an organization to be thriving in where it matters to them, which might be profit, market share, customer reputation, whatever it is. And so I think the time is now. And I think that, we need the storytelling and ways of changing this. And if there's those two organisations that pulled your offers at the last minute, if someone can sneakily slide my details across the table to those organisations, love to have a chat to their HR teams. But the time is definitely now.
Thank you so much. And I think, that is really disempowering, having offers taken away. It's one thing getting through the door, and then it's another thing having that kind of pulled away, and it just does not build up a fair, equitable experience. Exactly what Trina was talking about. I think we could go on and on and on about these kind of areas this afternoon, but unfortunately, we do only have 5 minutes left, and I would love to open the floor to questions. So I'm just going to pass on to Yvette again, who's going to discuss the kind of next steps, bit of a call to action for people that are here this afternoon.
Thanks, Gemma. And thanks, Natasha, Tove and Trina for a great discussion. So what happens next? Really, today's about not ending a conversation. It's really about starting a conversation. And we want this guide to be about action. So it's really a practical guide that gives employers tools and confidence in being able to employ women with a criminal record. We don't want it to sit in a shared folder anywhere. We don't want it to be on a shelf. We want it to be used. So the main points that we really want you to take away from today is we will be sending out a copy of the guide to everyone who registered and is on the call. So please read it, use the tools in it, look beyond the record and make fairer hiring decisions, and engage with SuccessWorks. You know, we can help you make inclusive recruitment part of your organisation's future. So we really want to be able to work with you to bring this to life. So if today's webinar resonated with you, we'd really value your support in sharing the recording. It will be available on our website and on our YouTube channel. Share it with professional networks. The more employers we reach, the more opportunities we create for women with a criminal record. And so we can now go to questions. If there's a couple in the chat. So Gemma, did you want to cover those off?
Absolutely. Thanks, Yvette. I'm actually, really interested by one here that's actually a question for Trina. Is, first of all, how do we get this message out to more HR managers? But can you speak to psychometric testing and what that does in terms of excluding women with criminal records?
It's a great question. And I think that, you know, I think I'd counter a response as well around the fact that I think psychometric testing is misused in lots of circumstances surrounding recruitment. So I think one of the overarching things I would say, not just for women who may have a criminal record, but in general, most psychometric testing were written by middle-aged white men based on middle-aged white men norms, thinking, behaviours, and the patriarchy. And so what we can have happen, now I'm accredited in the use of psychometric tools. I believe that there is a place and a space for them, but the power of them being used properly is in the debrief, the training, and the assumptions and the biases of the practitioner that's using them. I believe that they are being used as a screening tool without, again, HR having the capability to wrap up whatever the results might be with any discerning judgment around what it means. And I think we've got a lot of work to do in terms of capability. So I do think it can be used in a way that is that facilitates exclusion. And I think it's just one of the areas that we need to build capability in terms of how we meet, access, onboard, and develop our talent.
Fantastic. I believe we've got one hand up from Tove, and then we will be wrapping up.
Yes, sorry. I just wanted to add on that as an organizational psychologist, love psychometrics for some things, not so much for other things, just echoing Trina there. In that story that I told you about how I applied for that job, I went through 4 interviews and all the psychometrics for it. So what's it called? Ability testing. And in addition to what my cultural fit and how I work with leaders, it was so many of them, right? And they still determined that I would be a good fit for it. It just came down to me being too much risk with the criminal record. And that's why they took back the offer.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, everyone, today. Thank you, Yvette. Thank you, Trina, Natasha, Tove. And thank you so much to everyone who has been part of the journey to bring Redefining Recruitment together. SuccessWorks is so excited to start this next journey with you all. And yeah, anything you need, please do reach out. But thank you so much for joining us today.